a bunch of different exercises in order to land. And once we land at our other airport here, I will have some presents waiting for all of you. Now, let's first take a look at our really cool data set for today. So today's data, we have a ton of flight information. We have the dates of the flight. We made little logos for each of our different Excel theme airlines. You know, we love to go hard with the theme, guys. And we have all different airline names like VLOOKUP Airways, CellJet, Formula Fly, and then we have information about the flight. So like, where did it take off? You know, where did it land? The schedule and actual departure time. Were they canceled? Were they late? All those types of information. So this is all nicely set up for us, and we're going to navigate over here to our first pivot table exercise. Now, in order to first build a pivot table, I did want to give you a little 101 since I already have it set up here, just to show you how you would actually go to get to this step where we have the pivot table. Is we would come on over to our data set and highlight the whole thing. And once that's highlighted, I can hit insert and pivot table. And that's how we can go ahead and get our initial pivot table set up. Now, I have already done this step for us. So we have this over here is our little pivot table playground. And when I'm clicked on it, I can come up to our pivot table analyze ribbon and click that little field list button. So typically when you first open a pivot table, you will see this field list. However, sometimes it could shut off or you can exit out if you want to see things. And this is how you get it right back on. On that pivot table analyze ribbon, you just click on the field list button. Now, the cool part about pivot tables is what it does is it came over to our data set over here. And you know how we had all these different headings up here in this orange color? Well, if we come on over to the pivot section here, it took all those headings and turned those into these click and draggable little buttons. And these buttons are going to be going into our 4 different quadrants. So this top quadrant we have here is filters. So this is like, for example, if you actually put a filter on your data set. So you know how if you're on the data ribbon here and we have this filter option up at the top. So if you ever click on that and you have those little drop downs where you can filter data in and out, the pivot table one works just like that. Then we also have sections for columns and rows. So, you know, the classic, we're putting columns and rows in our pivot tables. And then we also have a section down here for values. So that is like the body of the pivot table. That is what we're actually analyzing. So here we're going to do a few analyses. And as we walk through these different pivot table things, I'm going to be showing you all different features that you can be leveraging in your day-to-day. So let's say for this first pivot table, and to back it up a drop too, if you're like, Kat, why are we even learning about pivot tables? Why are they so popular? Why are people asking if I could do them? When it comes to pivot tables, these are ways to analyze your data really quickly. So this is something where, let's say 5 minutes before a meeting, if your boss handed you this data set and was like, okay, I want you to analyze this and tell me some trends, some findings, you might be like, oh gosh, how am I going to do that so quickly, right? Where with a pivot table, we can actually make up this data and spin it together and get it to a spot where we can look at it and get answers really quickly. So I'm going to show you here how to build them. Now, let's say the first thing we want to do with our pivot table is we want to create a pivot table to identify the arrival status by airline. So I want to know out of all our airlines, how many arrived early? How many were late? How many, were on time for each of the flights that fall under those categories? So if we wanted to look at the data that way, the first thing I would do is come on up and let's activate that field list. And taking a look at it here, if we want to analyze this by airline, I'm going to take our airline name and click and drag and drop that into our row labels. And the cool part about pivot tables is you'll notice the second I drop that into the rows bucket, it created a row for each of our airlines. Then the values here are going to be our flight dates. So we're going to count how many flights were in each of those airlines. But we want to break it out further, right? If I come over and show you this here, this is just counting how many flights in total each airline had. But if I want to break this out and I want to know, hey, how many were early, how many were late, and so on, what I can do is add to our columns here the arrival code. So if I come, click and drag arrival code into columns, you can now see that it broke out our data here by early, late, on time, or a grand total across for each of those different items. Now let's zoom in for a moment and take a close look at this table and things that we can do to it. So when we get that pivot table data, one of the cool parts is you can actually just click on any of these different titles. And you know how it says row labels here? Like, it's not super helpful for us, right? So what I can do is rename this to like airlines, let's say, and that will go in and rename that section. Now, looking at this data, let's say we want to go in and answer a little question about it. And we want to know here which airline had the most total flights first. So let's come on over here and see which one had the most total flights. We can see that's over here with our function flights. I'm going to put FF here for function flight. Then this next one, which airline had more late arrivals than early? We can easily see that broken down here too with our Datafly had 71 late ones and 28 only early ones. So that would be Datafly as our airline there. So I'm going to put that into our little question bucket here. Now let's say we want to take this up a notch and we want to only see non-canceled flights and only flights that were within its own state. So in-state flights that were not canceled. So let's say we want to break down this data even further. Here's the trick. I'm going to zoom out for a moment and we're going to click back on our pivot table, turn on that field list. And this is where we're going to leverage our canceled flag as a filter. So this is essentially a little data point that says, was it canceled? Yes or no. And then we also want to do the in-state flight tag. And that will also give us a little yes or no if the state was in state for the flight. So here, if I come over to canceled flag, I'm going to mark it as not canceled, right? Because we want non-canceled flights. And then we want to see only ones that were in state. And when I do that, it'll actually filter the data we don't want to see right out of our table and allow us to answer our next set of questions here, which are, if we come on over, which airline had the least total flights? With these different flags on it, which airline had the least total flights? We can easily come over to our grand total column. And this is a little trick. If you ever need to see like the highest amount or the lowest amount, you can right click on any of the columns you want to sort it by, come over to sort, and we'll do smallest to largest. And we can see Datawings here only had 4 flights in total. So we're going to do DW here for Datawings. And then how many in-state flights for Datafly arrived early? So this is another way we could just take a look at that data by airline. And if we want to say, okay, how many for Datafly here were early? We can see here, this is the number 2, right? So 2 Datafly ones were early. And in seconds, we are able to answer these strategic questions about our data. And that is really where the power of pivot tables come into play. Now, let's say we want to also quick look at this broken down by morning and afternoon flights. So AM and PM flights. If we want to add in this extra layer and break it down even further, we can come on up to our pivot table, analyze ribbon here, and we are going to add that field list back on and now break it down by AM and PM. And you'll notice I'm going to drag and drop this one above the current rows that we have here for airline name. And that'll create this extra section breaking down each by morning and afternoon flights. And if we want to know how many PM departures were late for Sort Air, we can come on over to the Sort Air section here, and we can see that 8 there were late. So we're going to come on over and put in that number 8 inside of our cell to unlock our pre-boarding checks. So now that we analyzed that first data set, we went through, we answered all our strategic questions here. We're going to take it up a notch and click on our little pre-boarding check. And that just unlocked our next section here, which the cabin is in excellent condition for our passengers. Now let's take a look at some of these cancellation data points. So here we're going to analyze some reasons that some of the flights were canceled. And then the little cool part we're going to add into this is a slicer. So I'm going to show you how to slice up the data and analyze it by state as well. So to get us started here, we're going to click back into our basic pivot table playground, and we're going to build up this next one. So here on our little field list, we're going to add in the canceled flag, right? Because we want to look at all the ones that were canceled only. So I'm going to put canceled flag as our filter. And then we're going to break it down by airline name. So I'm going to put that in as our rows. And then we're analyzing the cancellation codes, right? Was it canceled because of weather, security, all the different things? So we're going to put those here into our columns. And then the values we're going to analyze are the flight dates. So that's going to go in and essentially just give us a count of how many flights fall into each of the categories. I'm going to zoom in here and let's take a look at what we got. Now, since we have that canceled flag filter, I'm going to click on canceled only, and that'll give us this whole section here where now we have a breakdown of all the different airlines. And then we have the count of how many flights were canceled in each of these different categories. Now, let's take a look at the question we're trying to answer here. We want to know what's the most common cause of cancellations out of California specifically. So you might be like, how would I look at this and be like, okay, I want to know just for California what these are. This could be a great use case for a slicer. So when I click on the pivot table, I can come up to this pivot table analyze ribbon, and we have this button here called insert slicer. And when we click on this, we can choose what we want to use to slice the data. So in this case, I'm going to click origin state if we want to look at California only, and that's going to create this cute little slicer button here that we can actually go in and adjust the size of, and we can scroll around in it. So I'm going to pop it over to the side for us here. And now what we can do is click on California only, and that just updated our whole table. So now we can answer that strategic question here about California. So what's the most common cause of cancellations out of California? We can look at these grand totals down at the bottom and be like, okay, 38 of them were due to security. Grand totals, the other 86 one. So out of the different categories here, it would be security. So I'm going to put this inside of our little section here. And then let's say now we want to look at which airline had the most cancellations due to weather specifically, but only flights that left from Arizona, California, or Colorado. So this time I want to look at 3 states, not just California. What I can do here is hold down my control button on my keyboard, and I can click on multiple different items here. So that's Arizona, that's California, and then we're going to come down and click on Colorado as well. And now those 3 different ones are selected. And we could see that due to weather, we had 41 different ones canceled. So I'd put that 41 over here. And now we can clear for takeoff on this next section. And our systems are checked. So we will be pivoting through the skies momentarily, team. And we have now unlocked our next section, which here we're going to take it up another notch in pivot table land, and we're going to take a look at calculated fields, which are really cool, and we're also going to look at how to make your own custom groups. So this is where, you start to taking it up a little bit of a notch, team. We got this. So here, taking a look. Let's say we want to compare flight capacity this time. So I want to know by each airline how many people were on the flight. What is the flight capacity there? And I only want to look at 2023, and I want it broken down by month. So we've got a lot of things going on here. Where would we get started? So coming on over, I'm going to click on our little pivot table playground here. And you'll notice we have all of these set up here already, but keep in mind, if you don't see this, that's where you would highlight that source data, right? And come over to insert pivot table and put it in, just so you have that in the back of your head. And now when I turn on the field list, let's start breaking this down. So if we want to look at this by month, we're definitely going to need those flight dates. So I'm going to put those into our columns. Now you'll notice when I did that, it actually broke it down by all these different layers, years, quarters, months, and the date in general. So if I only want to look at this by year to be able to filter to just 2023, and by month to be able to break it down by month, watch this little trick. I can click drag out And see how it makes that little X? When I let go, it'll remove that from my pivot table. So I can come over here and pull those two out. So I only have years and months. Now for our rows here, we are going to look at this by airline name. So I'm going to put that in our rows. And then let's come over and take a look at what we got here. We only want to look at this data by 2023. So I'm going to come up to the top and just click 2023. And then we're going to fan this out so we can see each of the different months. Now you might be like, yeah, there's no data in here. But this is where we are going to make our own custom calculated field. Because let's say we wanted to know what the percentage capacity was on each of those flights. And here what would happen is it would be a little formula that would take the number of passengers that were on the plane. So if there were 100 passengers and there was 100 people in the capacity, then our capacity would be at 100%, right? We filled the entire plane. So this isn't something we have in our data set. We don't have the percent capacity in there, but we have these two different metrics that we can divide the number of passenger metric by the flight capacity metric and make our own new one inside the pivot table. So this is how we can do it. I'm going to click inside the pivot table and come up to pivot table analyze ribbon, that trusty ribbon that appears when we are clicked on a pivot table. And then we're going to come over to fields, items, and sets. And we have this option here called a calculated field. And the cool part about this is where you can make your own custom field by doing a little calculation with the fields you already have. So in this case, we are going to call this percent capacity because that is the percent full, each one of those are. And then this is where in this formula box, we can come on down to our fields and actually click on what we want to use. So here I'm going to come down to number of passengers. And if you double click it, it'll bring it up here. And we're going to divide it by, so I did the little slash, and we're going to divide it by the flight capacity. And then if I click on add and OK, that is going to go through and calculate it for all the airlines and for all the months. Now, I'm going to make this into a percentage format so we can really get in here and analyze and do a little shortcut, Alt-HOI, which is a viral one on social media, to auto adjust those column widths. So now we actually have a breakdown by airline and by month how full these planes were. And now let's take a look at our question that we have here, which is which airline had the highest occupancy in the month of May? So now if I come over here and I sort the May column from largest to smallest, I can see that merge flights over here was at 97% in May, and that's the highest one there. So I can come on over and do the abbreviation here for merge flights. Now, another cool feature here is we can do some custom grouping. So let's say I wanted to analyze and know which parent company had the most passengers in 2023. And these are the different breakdowns. So Data Air Inc., these all fall under that parent company. Aeromation, these all fall under that one. And these two are independent over here. So what I can do is create custom groups to then analyze that data by. Because if I tried to do this manually, it could be really difficult, right? Because I'd be like, all right, I'm going to add up for these 4 different ones, what it was in 2023, and that could take a long time. So here's the trick. First, what I'm going to do is swap the data out of here because we're not looking in this example at that percentage capacity like what we have here, but we actually want it to be by passengers. So what I'm going to do is click on our pivot table, come over to the field list, and we want to look at it this time by passengers. So I'm going to pull that one out and we're going to drag in number of passengers into our values. Then since we're only looking at it by year in 2023, I'm going to close that down so you only go in and see the particular year. And then let's switch up the format here. So let's put the commas in between so we can actually get the number of passengers. Now, if we want to analyze this, though, by parent company, like what we see over here, here is the little trick to add them together. So I'm going to click on each of these different ones while holding down my control key. So for this first little group, we have CellJet, we got Datafly, Datawings, and we have Query Quest Air. So now if I come over and click on all of these and then right click and click on group, that is going to group all 4 of those together in this little section. Now, to quickly do the other ones, I'm going to come on over and grab macro air, merge flights, and cell range airways. So that's our next little group. And we're going to click on the group option here. And then we have for functions LLC, we got our sort air, some air. I love these little names, guys. And then we have the function flight and formula fly. We're going to group those together as well. So now with these group names, to make it easier, I can actually name these Data Air Inc. and just write right on over it. And then also, so for example, if we have, aeromation or functions, you can actually go in and name those different sections there. And then if we want to quickly see in this example what the highest one was, it's going to be this little section we have over here for functions LLC, which I can name this one here, functions LLC. And that is going to have our highest. So we can come in and put that over here and unlock our next section here, which we have some clear skies ahead. We can clear up that data and move to our last round of insights here. So I'm going to come on over to our next tab, which is some data visualization techniques. So we're going to look at some different ways to analyze and break down our data here. We're going to be looking at pivot charts, slicers, and these are all cool pieces that you can leverage if you are building some sort of interactive dashboard in Excel. So now let's say we want to do another little visualization, and we want to break it down this time by comparing the number of passengers and the flight capacity by year. So what we can do here is come on back over to our pivot table section and come over to our field list. And in this case, we are going to be breaking down the flight date by years only. So I'm going to put that into our rows, and we're going to do that same little trick we did before, where if I want to only see this by year, I can pull out the quarters, I could pull out the months, and I could pull out the date. So that way it's just breaking down each year. Then we also want to look at the flight capacity as our value and the number of passengers. So I'm dragging and dropping those 2 metrics into our values bucket. Then columns by default is going to say values here when you drag those in there. And then we will also want to make this filtered by the cancellation status here for non-canceled flights only. So let's come in here and take a closer look at what we've got going on. So we have our 2 different years, and then we have how many people were on the flights and the number of passengers here. And I'm going to do a little comma in between to get those looking nice and formatted. Now, let's say we want to break this down by not canceled flights only. I can come up to that filter section for our cancellation flag and break that down. And let's take a look at the question we're trying to answer here. So coming on down to the bottom, we want to know which year had the higher flight capacity, and we want to analyze this with a little chart. And we also want to only know this, though, for particular airlines. So for Datafly and Merge Flights, that's how we want to break it down by. So we need to add in that little slicer in order to break it down by those elements, right? So similar to what we did before, where we added a slicer by state to look at California only, this time we're going to add a slicer by airline to look at those 2 different airlines. So here I'm going to click on over on our pivot table, and we can come on up to our pivot table analyze ribbon again and click on the insert slicer option. And now with this insert slicer option, this time we're going to click on airline name. And I want you to keep in mind too, we can add tons of different slicers here. So it doesn't have to be just one. In this case, we're only using one for the example, but keep in mind, if you wanted to build a cool interactive dashboard and cut the data, by AM and PM flights, by destination state, you could break it down in all different ways. And so in this case, we're just going to do the airline name and click OK. And that'll add this cute little box here where we can scroll through and select different airlines. Now, by default, these are all turned on, right? So everything's included. But when I go to click on one, for example, like Datafly, that is going to show us only that data there. And now let's say we want to take it up a notch, and we want to analyze this also in a chart format. And this is really where the visualizations come into play, because for a lot of people, if they looked at a table like this, or, a lot of the tables we've been creating here, and if they're not that familiar with the data, they might get overwhelmed, right? Or it could even be overwhelming to you as well to look at these tables for the first time and be like, that's a lot of information. Where for many people, visual learners, seeing a chart or a graph could be a much easier way to comprehend the data and to be able to pull the strategic answers to questions that you're looking for. So in this case, if we wanted to analyze this in a little clustered column chart, I can click on our table here, and on my insert ribbon, I have this pivot chart option. When I click on pivot chart, it'll bring up our little insert chart section where we have tons of different charts we can easily insert from our pivot table menu. So based on that pivot table data, all of these charts will literally create themselves for you based on that data. However, I will note that some of these will definitely fit your data better than others. So it really depends on the type of data that you have and what you're looking to analyze. And based on that, you'll be able to figure out, okay, this would look good as a pie chart or a column chart. There's also this little recommended charts option too that could be really helpful if you're not sure the best way to break down your data. That is a great option too. Now for our example here, we are going to stay in the clustered column section, and we have a few different options. We have like a stacked option. We have all different 3D ones. Maybe should we try 3D one? That looks cool. Let's do like a 3D column, or you know what? Let's stick to a cluster because I want to show you a cool feature of this. Let's stick to a cluster column. Maybe we'll make more charts, guys. I get so excited. All right, we're going to put in one cluster column chart. Now, with this chart, this one got me when I first tested this out. I was like, wait a minute. We're analyzing two different things here. Let's zoom in. We're analyzing two different things, the flight capacity and the number of passengers. Why do I only see one bar? Here's the thing. This might happen sometimes, so I'm glad we built this into the example. There actually is a second bar here, but it's in white, so it's actually hard to see. So let's talk about customizing this chart to make sure it is beautifully visible for the end user. So what we can do is when we are clicked on the chart, we can now get this nifty little pivot chart analyze ribbon. And from this ribbon, you could add your slicers, your timelines, all different features. Then we have a design option where you can change the look of your chart here. And then we also have a format option where you could get into the specific little pieces of your chart. So I can come in and alter the bars that way. Or if I want to keep it as like more of a cohesive look that aligns with theme colors that I may be using, I can click on the change color option and just click on a different theme. Now you'll notice when I hover over colorful palette 2, for example, the second color in the palette is the gray, where in this one, the second color is the white. So that's why it's turning that second bar white instead of gray. And then this one, there's all different options here, and we have some fun monochromatic ones as well. Let's say for this example, to stick to the look we're going for here, we're going to do colorful palette number 2 with our turquoise and light gray, and that is going to show us the breakdown there. Now let's come on back over to our question here, and this is which year had the higher flight capacity, but we only want to look at 2 particular airlines. So we want to look at Datafly and merge flights. So if I come over here, we have Datafly selected, but I'm going to hold down my control key and click on merge flights as well. And that just went and reanalyzed our data. How cool is that? So now I want you to picture, right? Let's say we had a ton of different charts analyzing all different things. So if I took, all these different pivot tables we had on the other tabs, and we made some charts off of them, when we were looking at some of the different elements that we had there, right? Like the early, the late, like the different pieces, we can copy and paste those charts all onto one section and build our own interactive dashboard. And the biggest thing when you are doing your own dashboard in Excel is you want to make sure you have the same pivot table cache. And I'm not talking about cash money. I'm talking about CACHE. Cache. And that is essentially the data that is inside of the pivot table. You want to make sure you're working off that same source. And that's how all these different little pieces will interconnect, where if I click on a slicer, it's going to tie into all the different pivot tables we have. And you could get the same pivot table cache by copying and pasting from that same original data set. So for example, if I make 5 pivot tables, I use the same data set each time. And then from those 5 pivot tables, one I make a bar chart, one I make a column chart, one I make a pivot, a circle, pie chart, donut chart, all the charts. You can go and copy and paste all those charts onto one table and then start slicing it. And that's what we just did here. So here we have it sliced for those 2 different airlines, and it automatically updated this table here, which now we can come on over and see which year had the higher flight capacity. We can see capacity is the blue one here, and that would be our 2023. And I wanted to just quickly show you too before we hit our final button here and unlock the presents we have for all of you. Just so you know this as well, you can go in by clicking this little plus sign and alter the chart elements. So this is cool when it comes to visualization and really getting that look that you want when it comes to your charts or graphs. So we have, axis titles. If you want to add in titles and rename them, you could do that. We have chart titles. So if you want to name your chart, so people know what you're analyzing. Data labels are an awesome one too. So instead of just looking from afar at that bar chart and trying to guesstimate what those numbers are, you can add in little data labels that will tell you exactly what they are. We even have cool things like trend lines, error bars, and you can also do a little data table underneath, pulling in that data, which is a nice feature too. And the chart elements will change depending on what chart type you pick. So there's really just tons to explore in the chart area, but I'm hoping this lesson here today helped you feel more empowered when it comes to pivot tables and charts and really visualizing that data. So now that we have answered our magical question here, I'm going to click on our button, and we have now had a great flight through all the data. And here are a few more routes that help you ace your pivot tables. So we have 2 presents here for all of you. Down here in our little bag here, we have a pivot workbook for you to practice with. And we also have a data visualization PDF guide for all of you too. So for anyone who has attended our class here today live, you will be getting an email after we hang up. We're still live. We'll do a little Q&A here. But once we hang up the live, you will get an email with your bonus presents for attending here live, because Cheat Sheets and I appreciate it more than you know. So now we are going to come on back over. Hi, everybody. And I'm going to say hi to the team here. And we wanted to, as promised, provide you with the largest discount code we ever